In this video, we're looking at the PH-90 phaser device. To explain what a phaser is doing is kind of difficult because a lot of phasers operate in different ways. They have different notches or different bands with different widths and splits between the bands. On the PH-90 phaser, we have 4 bands, and when you're using the frequency control, you're setting the starting frequency of the first of these 4 bands. You could think of each of these like a tiny bandpass filter that only affects a very small range of frequencies, but it sweeps according to the settings of the rate and frequency mod of our LFO here. It also has a feedback control that feeds back the input of this filtered signal in a similar way to the CF101. The split control controls the width between each of these bands, and the width control is going to control the actual width of each of the bands. So let's test some of these sounds out. First, we'll hear this Thor dry as we have it. Now let's hear it with the phaser. And you can hear the trippy sweeping effect that a phaser has. Now let's see what happens when we sweep the frequency control. As we use the frequency control to get the starting notch of the 4-band phaser to a different frequency range, we change the entire spectrum of the sweep that the PH-90 is capable of spitting out. We use the split control to adjust the distance between each of the 4 bands. So let's see what happens when we play with the split control. So the split control also adjusts the tone and harmonic spectrum that the frequency knob is capable of producing. The control for the width of each band is controlled with the next knob, and let's hear what that sounds like. Its effect is much more subtle, but when you sweep it in conjunction with the frequency and split knobs, it adds a lot more variety to the different ways that the LFO will cause the frequency knob to sweep. Let's play with the feedback control next. By forcing the phaser to feed its filtered and modulated input back into the original signal, we increase the presence of the effect exponentially, and you can get some really cool resonant tones in a similar way that we did with the CF101 chorus and flanger. Now let's look at some cool tricks that we can do with the frequency modulation and the rate knob. I'm going to take it off of sync and turn the modulation relatively high. The PH-90 is capable of doing some pretty cool things. Just experiment with the controls a little more. It's a lot easier when you know what you're doing. Next, let's look at this drum combinator that I've hooked up called Phaser Drums. What I've done here is split the drums into 2 bands, a high and a low band. That way I can process the 2 bands of the bass and snare drum and then the hi-hats and other cymbals separately. So in this case, I have a reverb on the bass and snare drum, and I have a phaser on the hi-hats and other cymbals. I can adjust the crossover, or the point where these two bands are split, and I can turn on the phaser with my knob here. Let's hear what this sounds like. First, dry. Now with the phaser. Routing makes this combinator possible. First, I'm going to flip to the back of the rack, and we'll clean up the cabling. We'll look and see that the Dr. Octorec's main outputs are going into a Spider Audio merger and splitter. There, it's being split into two duplicate signals. Each of these signals is going into one of two stereo imagers, one splitting just the high band, and the other splitting just the low band. These signals are being combined in a 6-channel mixer, but the high signal is being run through a phaser first. The master outs of this line mixer go to the combi outputs, and there's an auxiliary send on the mixer for a reverb. I've only got that mixed in on the low channel. By programming my combinator's first knob to simultaneously adjust the crossover frequency on each stereo imager, I can vary the effect of the phaser by changing that crossover. Let's hear that. Now that we know more about a phaser and what the PH-90 half-rack phaser is capable of, let's move along to the next video about the UN16 unison device. Thanks for watching.